Okay. All right. Cool. How about this one? Oh, all right. We're good to go. Everything's live and good to go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this panel. This is a panel about source control and revision and all that good stuff. So I'm glad you can make it. I know some of you guys probably had a rough time last night getting up here. Which probably reflects in the amount of people in the audience. But no, it's good. I'm glad you guys got to come. Thanks for getting here. My name's Josh Skelton. I work at the University of Georgia. Make games and apps for veterinary students, veterinary medicine students all over the world. We make stuff for everybody. And one of the things I noticed, I put a talk in Proceeds. I noticed that at the university they don't really do a lot about source control and how to use it. So when you get in the real world and you want to use it, or if you're working at a company that uses it, it's a kind of a big stepping stone. You kind of get thrown into it, so it's kind of nice to at least talk to some people. And that's what we really want to do, is talk to people, answer some questions. So I'm going to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves and what they do, and then we'll come back. So.
Hi guys, I'm Zack Schneider. I work at Virtually Better. We make PR applications for psychologists and use that to treat people with social anxiety. We use Git and Perforce at my office, so that's a lot of fun.
Hey, I'm Borden. I work at a company called Coaching Education that makes biology education games in Athens. We use Git, and I've in the past used SVN and Doriot.
My name is Clint. I work at Thrust Interactive. We do social and mobile games. We recently released a game called Hoochoo on an iOS App Store. We primarily use Git at Thrust. I've also used Subversion in the past.
I'm Edie Woefle. I currently work for a logistics startup, but in the past I've worked at several indie studios here in Atlanta, and I've worked with TFS, Git, and SVN.
My name is Jacobson. I'm with Things at Work, and we make games for a variety of things, including. Currently, we use Material and SVN, but in the past, I've used CVS and Visual Source Safe, and that first version of the system I think everyone uses, we copy the entire directory.
Cool. So, show of hands, who here uses source control? Awesome. So you all know about source control. Great. So we don't have to really explain the little minute details in it. So, well, good. Oh yeah. Well, for the audience that might be listening, so we could. I was just getting a show of hands of who kind of used it, didn't use it, but we can explain some of the differences. I use SVN, but some of you guys, you want to kind of explain that? Want to pick that up and explain the basis? Just a quick run through because everybody here knows it. Source control, why you use it, and your favorite one and why. And we'll start with Zack.
So for ease of use, we use Gitolite, and basically it's you have your project on your computer. You push it to you create a repo on your server. You push your project to it, and then it keeps the delta of your project on that server. And every time you pull, you get the entire repo pulled to your computer. So you have your entire repo on your feed, so you can roll back locally and then push that back to the server, and now the server's running the same copy. We also started just using Perforce, which is it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult to set up, but once you get it set up, it's a lot. It's a lot nicer in that you don't have to worry about your repo corrupting like you do with Git, because we have rather large repos. So we regularly have repos that are over 100 gigs large, because our artists like to push and save all of their iterations of their art. So even their working files, they have versions, which is not really correct, but we address that later. So yeah, Perforce, you can actually pull individual files rather than the entire project, which makes it a lot nicer and a lot cleaner when you're working. Say you're just updating one script, that's all you have to do. You just pull that one script, you lock it, you change it, and then you push it back to the server. So that one's a lot nicer and a lot more clean. But it's very ambiguous in that when you're resolving merges and things like that, you have to worry about terminology like your source and your target, and figuring out which one is actually the server and which one's your topic.
So. People might be listening at home. Also keep in mind, like, just really briefly, what is source control, right? Because there's probably people watching that may not know it. Really briefly, then talk about, what you use in language.
Yes, I'll talk about this. So, have you ever deleted a file and I don't know, emptied your recycle bin and thought it was gone? Like if you had that file in version control, you could easily get it back. But it also tracks any changes to any of your files, any modification. It will show you for each of your revisions, which is just a set of changes, the difference between what the old version of the file was and the new version of the file. At any time, you can go back to any of those old versions. There are other features like you can branch your project and have special branches for specific features you're adding or whatever you want it to be. I don't know, what am I forgetting?
Another key aspect is that it's really a great tool for collaboration on the code. So it's great to be able to back up your files and roll back to that, but that's probably pretty infrequent compared to how frequently you're trying to merge your code or merge your project with somebody else's stuff. So a good version control tool will facilitate that and make it easier instead of more difficult.
Oh, I was going to add the other feature of version control. It's called blame. And you can see who wrote a line of code and when. And honestly, the who wrote the line of code is fun for yelling at someone in the office or trying to find out who's bringing the pick. But the when can be really, really valuable because you can see all the other changes made around the exact same time that line of code was written.
I was gonna piggyback on that and say, you can tell exactly when bugs are introduced. Like, I can, if you set everything up right, I can say, all right, this version, everything worked great. On this next version, several bugs were introduced. I know exactly where to go within the code to fix those bugs.
Also, along the lines of blame, that's also a useful tool in knowing who to blame so that you can talk with them and help them kind of grow as a programmer. And then another kind of related tool, especially with, I don't know, I primarily use Git, so I don't know if the other tools have something similar, but not built into Git, but built into typical Git hosting services like GitHub, is code review. And so before you actually submit your code to be kind of merged into the main development branch, you can have other people look at that. They can learn from looking at that, or it could be where you're helping them fix problems or that kind of stuff, or maybe someone's doing a feature or like a bug fix on something, but they're not the person who worked on it primarily because that person's working on something else now. So someone more junior is coming along and kind of cleaning up some stuff. The other person can kind of review it, and it saves them time.
I'm gonna touch on that a little bit further. Like if you set everything up and you have automated testing before it gets pushed into like a main branch, before you're allowed to merge your code in, it has to pass like a basic quality test, within on top of like other people looking at it, which creates a lot cleaner code. And you always, especially if you have like your main code on master, then you know that master's the basic functionality of everything that you have written tests for is working, and there's some sort of like trust.
So Zach, you had mentioned a little bit about some different things you worked with. So somebody looking from outside in, why would you use one over another? Why would I use say Git over SVN or over Git or anything? Is there a reason why you guys where you're at chose to work with the tools that you're working with? So feel free to whoever wants to answer.
I already talked about mine. You guys want to step in?
At my current company, I'm actually the only developer and the only employee. So I use Git for myself. I branch off for my own feature branches. I make my own small commits. I merge my branches into master. And I do it in primarily Git and GitHub because I like the offline functionality since I do work from home full time and that allows me a lot of freedom to travel. I can get on a plane and I can make commits locally. And when I get somewhere with Wi-Fi, I can sync everything up to GitHub and not have to worry about, running into an issue that the file over here is not something that I have, or I have like a working local copy of everything, which makes my life a lot more enjoyable and a lot easier to work with.
So we switched from Git to Perforce, and so I have experience with both a lot. I like Git because it's relatively easy to set up, and I say relatively because Perforce is actually hard to set up. But it's kind of hard to pick between the two because they both have their strengths and weaknesses. So with Git, you have the issue of with big repos it corrupts. With Perforce, you have the issue of people locking files and the ambiguous language I talked about earlier. So they're both really good for smaller projects. Perforce might be a little bit more of an investment in time in setting up, but I think all in all, at my company, everybody likes Git a little bit more. So yeah, that's what.
So I think one thing no one's quite touched on yet is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Perforce a centralized version control system? So Perforce and Subversion are centralized version control systems, and Git and Mercurial are distributed version control systems. And what that means is that with a centralized version control system, you have a server somewhere, probably in your office, or maybe it's hosted by Google or Amazon or something, it holds the whole history of your project. That one server holds the whole history, and when you check out a working copy of your project, you're just getting the files from that one revision. Whereas the distributed version control system, like Git or Mercurial, everyone has a copy of the full history of the project. Everyone checks out the whole repository and has the whole history, and that's why you can commit locally, is because you have your own copy of the whole repo, and you can commit locally and then later on merge with, you could still have a centralized server that's kind of the, where everybody pulls from and merges back into, but it's a little bit different.
That's a good point. So when you're running Git and you pull your project, you're actually pulling the whole repo, so you pull on all the versions prior. So that means you don't have a lot of hard drive space, and you're pulling a repo that's 60 gigs. You're going to take up 60 gigs of your hard drive space versus Perforce, which if you pull the project, you just get, say, that 5 gig project, and not all the iterations of that project. So it's something to keep in mind when you're picking your version control.
The other big feature, and touching this, is locking. So with a distributed version control system, there's no central server that knows who's allowed to make edits to a file at the same time. With a centralized version control system, you can. So let's say you have a bunch of artists working in Maya. Maya doesn't merge well between two different versions, so maybe you don't want them to be able to change something at the same time. Whereas with code, those are text files, and we're all pretty good at reading text files and looking at this part. So our rules are like SVN is where we use a lot of our the artist's files that they're working on, not the end results of those files, but as they're iterating. And then our source control, our code, and any of the game-ready assets after they come out of the art pipeline, we put into Mercurial, which, since a lot of people know Git, Mercurial at one point was an easier to use variant of Git on Windows. So that's why we use that instead of Git, and then we kept it as opposed to moving to Git because it was already set up.
And I think I'm going to piggyback with that. It's okay to use two different ones at once, especially for art assets. I personally, like I said, I use Git, and I've used Git in small teams and large teams. And you run into things like merge conflicts and everything else, but I feel like Git is a lot easier to fix and merge. Like, you're not going to be able to check in anything that conflicts with something else, which I think happens more or less, like when I've used TFS in the past. You completely overrun what another developer has checked in. And, you may, and then having to figure out, like, where exactly it was changed and what exactly you overwrote can be a huge pain. But whereas Git, it's fairly easy to find in that file. Like if you try to run it, it tells you have an error online, whatever, because Git inserts these characters into the text file to let you know exactly where it is. And you can see the differences between the two right there and be able to say, oh, okay, well, I mean, I've had little things like an extra spacing that is just slightly different, which is annoying, but at the same time, not a huge deal. Or it could be like 3 or 4 lines that I was improving upon that someone else is adding a feature to, and then kind of hand merge those at a small scale versus having to worry about almost the file as a whole.
So we use Git for us, as mentioned. We came from Subversion, and so we used a very simple flow of everyone just checking up the master branch, and you make a few changes, and then you push it back. When moving to Git, opens up a lot more options, because in comparison to Subversion, it just makes merging and branching second nature, whereas with Subversion, I felt it was an afterthought. But it was interesting to hear that you guys use it for art, I guess primarily for the locking. We use a process called Git flow. It's more of a methodology, and it's fairly common, but we just switched to that recently, and it really takes advantage of the branching and merging nature of Git. So actually the master branch is used for only basically you can make a build off of it always, whereas then we work off of the development branch where all the main changes, main development stuff happens, and then all the actual changes are on their own side feature branches that get merged in development, and then we have a release. You can take the development branch and push that to master.
So, me, it's I use Subversion with SVN, but it's mainly because that's what I knew. That's what one of the first tools I use, and I'm the only full-time developer where I'm at. So I just continue using it mainly because it's free. I have a free Visual SVN server that's set up. Now the client that I use on my Mac is not free, but it didn't cost much. You can pay for it. But on PC, you can use Torrent SVN, which is free. So a cost factor might be a thing. Do you guys want to touch on that? If you have any factors for cost with these different technologies? I don't know these as well.
Microsoft Visual Studio, Microsoft Source, I don't think is free and was stupid expensive and and SVN can do everything that I know Microsoft's version control system could do. I haven't used it since we switched to SVN. That's probably no longer the case. But Material and Git are free. They both have Tortoise clients as well.
Git is free, and I tend to work in the command line, which is also free. But if I do want like a desktop, if I'm feeling lazy and don't feel like typing in the commands, which is a very rare day, I have GitHub has a desktop application that's fairly easy to make commits and to push up to the server, and I use GitHub for all my posting, which is free if you want your code to be accessed to anyone in the world. But I pay, I think, $10 a month for to have like 10 private repos that I can work on my project without having it exposed to everyone on the internet.
Yeah, I think unless you're using Perforce, which has I think you said you have to pay if you use more than 20 users. The version control software is mostly free and open source. You might end up paying for hosting, GitHub or Bitbucket's another popular one. I think that one lets you do free private repos up to 5 users on a project, something like that.
Like we said before, command line's always free, so use that if you really know what you're doing. You can always search all of the commands, and there's tons out there of websites that are telling you exactly how to use it. For instance, we had an issue yesterday where somebody actually copied the serialized piece of the repo to a new drive, and we couldn't access But I use a Mac with our Get-A-Lite server, so I actually use both command line and Tower for ease of use for that.
But for I know for Windows, certainly there's a GUI for every single forget material, and there's actually several. You can look at all of them. The only time I touch the command line personally is when I'm writing like a Python script that's going to actually do something on the command line.
I've had issues with our Git repos corrupting, so we actually had to use the command line to go and repack the repo. Yeah, it's not fun. But those are times when those interfaces just want to fail you, where they can't really do anything. So they just tell you, oh, well, there's an error, and just stop them. But the command line can give you a little bit more information.
I just use the command line primarily, but there's another tool for Git called GitK, and that if I need to look at kind of the structure of how different commits relate to each other, I'll use that. But a lot of people on my team use source tree as it's called, and that's on, I'm pretty sure that's on Mac and Windows, and not open source.
I've worked on several teams in the past where we were just working on Git, but everyone seemed to be on a different GUI, which caused a lot of problems. Because if you actually look down deep into the GUIs, a lot of them, my only hesitation with using quite a few of them is actually look at what they're actually doing, like how they're making that merge. And a lot of times they add a lot of extra parameters at the end. Source tree is actually the one I'm thinking of in general that I've actually looked at what the actual command is, and I was like, yeah, it's adding all these extra junk at the end of it that you could just do git merge or git commit with a message, which once we got all on the same kind of GUI, the things, those type of things tended to filter out. But I was the only one in the office at the time who had been previously experienced with Git, and I did a lot of running around, like trying to figure out exactly what they were doing when it was committed, and ended up running a lot of command lines. So if you are going to use a GUI, then make sure and you're working on a team, make sure the whole team is typically like using the same GUI.
So I want to say something about that. Where I work, everybody uses source tree, but source tree has its interface is like slightly different on Windows and Mac. Like it has some different like terminology and some of the menus, and like, the layout is weird on Windows. It's very strange. I don't know why they do it, but it's free. So.
Yeah, and we were using source tree on Windows, and I worked with Git mostly on Mac at that point, and so then when I started actually looking at all these different things, and I was like, yeah, I was like, you just learn these 3 commands. There's an xkcd comment on it. Like, pretty much, if you're using Git, there's about 3 commands that you use. Just memorize them, and you'll be fine unless you're doing something extremely complicated. And again, like was mentioned earlier, if there is something that comes up, like a quick Google search and Stack Overflow is your friend.
So, do you have any artists in here? Oh, 1, 2, okay. 3? Oh, and you're the one that you never used version control, right? Okay, cool. So, this is a question more for them, I guess. So, when you start talking about command line, artists don't, right? So, we use GUI. So, do you have any stories or how you can help people that use version control where you're at, or if you worked with people before, how you get by that curve, right? Because I know it's trouble where I'm the only full-time developer. I have 8 artists, 9, and it's been fun.
Lucky you having 8, 9 artists. So with our artists, we actually had to walk through them step by step, showing them how to do it. And obviously, with the size of our repos, we have issues with our artists committing things that they shouldn't commit and stuff. So we really have to go through and show them how to push the correct files and show them what they need to check in. And I don't think we mentioned it before, but Git has the ability to have this file that's a git ignore, and it basically ignores certain files that we want to commit. For instance, with our Unity project, we have that library file, which is basically the compiled version of our project sitting there. So we just ignore the entire library and it saves us like 2 gigs or something like that, depending on the size of the project. So artists a lot of times will commit their Maya files, their working Maya files, and that really expands the size of the repo. So we try to just have them commit their final art or the piece that we're going to currently use in the project at that time, and try to ignore all of those extra Maya files.
So when I've gone all the way from you're working on this piece of art, you need to be able to test it in the game and change it and show people how to do it. Do this command, here's a GUI, click, here's the button presses in order that you're going to do. If you see an error message, just yell for someone. And the error messages there were like, you need to merge, right? That would pop up and you would be scared, and that's fine. 90% of the time you didn't have to do that. But I found that when it comes to branching, there's a huge amount of intellectual overhead or understanding you have to be able to effectively use branches and think and decide, which branch, if you want to create a new branch or things like that. So in general, a lot of the people we work with, they know which branch they're working on, or which main branch they're working on. They don't know which non-branch. But so those kinds of things, sometimes there's a more dictatorial aspect of it, even though that destroys the distributed version control system, just because even though a lot of times they want to learn it, there's usually something more interesting that they want to spend their time learning than version control, something new feature in Maya, for instance. And it's that people have a finite amount of time to learn stuff.
We have, since we switched from Git to Perforce, we have this a little bit of pushback from our art side, because there's a little bit of fundamental difference between the two, and it's like a degree of complication in using Perforce because of the ability to lock files, and the thing where you have to check files out to use them. They often forget to do that. So there's been a lot of pushback from our art department on using Perforce. So it's just the education that's really the issue. So we're actually about to set up a whole little kind of Scrum meeting not Scrum, but it's just a meeting to really teach everyone the basics of what Perforce is. So we're actually about to go through that right now.
So if you are a programmer working with an artist, I would say just be patient with them and try to help them. But if you were an artist, I see a lot of artists that are like afraid of doing things in version control software, and I would say just don't be afraid of it. It's there so that you can't break anything very much. So don't be afraid to commit things or delete things, whatever. It's there to help you with that.
So, all right, we're halfway through. I was going to open up for any questions, because I want to direct this more toward your questions that you might have, particularly about version control or anything. So I can open it up to questions. If you have questions, we'll continue discussing. Any questions?
On my company, we use Git. We have one employee who would just commit his feature over anything, doesn't care what he breaks. If there's merge conflicts, he says, he reverts your work and gets his work done. How would you handle an employee like that, a programmer who does stuff like that? I wish he can, but that's not an option.
So we had a senior developer who did not trust version control, not Git, just didn't trust version control, to the point where he had his own copy of every file, and then he had the copy that was in version control. He would work on his own private copy and then copy those files into version control, which had a lot of the, crushing other people's changes. And the answer there was kind of, we was really smart at a lot of other things. So we actually tolerated it, and so we would say, okay, we reverted our work, and actually I was the junior programmer at the time, and I would go back and re-implement other people's work on top of his overrides. Assuming that the person's not that valuable, and but you still can't fire him, I would say put him on his own branch. This is Dave's branch.
Yeah, there's a way that you can lock down like a master branch. And like I was talking about earlier, if you have regression testing and that sort of thing, where you have some sort of integrity to your master branch, it has to be like you have to do a what's the word they're not saying? You said it earlier. You have to have it your code review. You have to have it reviewed before it can actually be merged into the master branch. I mean that helps a lot in making sure that if his stuff breaks everybody else's stuff, like there are tools that you can and things that you can do within Git to make sure that that code never makes it into the master.
Especially with Git, since it's distributed, you can actually have multiple servers that your repo is tied to. And so a more extreme way of doing it is you've got a server that is your source of stuff, and he doesn't have write access to that. He has read access only. Then he pulls down those changes, and then he commits it to another server that he has write access to, and then that can be used as kind of a more controlled code review, where it's like it's gotta be easily merged into the original source before if it doesn't merge, it doesn't play nice, it pass up, and you reject it, you don't allow that merge, he's got to go back and he's not going to work on that. So it's basically putting three servers in there to force them.
The other option is if you give him his own branch, you commit whenever and push whenever, and he's never moved stuff off or onto his branch, then that's exactly the way he's can work, exactly like he's the only one in the company. And then realizing what we did with the person who didn't like version control is they had a time of day when they would sync with everyone else. And so you can literally say, okay, on Dave's branch, just don't, commit your stuff at 4:15, pull an update because someone else will have taken your code, merged it, pushed it back to your private branch. Again, depending on how much you want to automate.
And I think what he's talking about is that he does work on his own branch, but he merges his stuff willy-nilly into the what's supposed to be the integrity branch.
Right, and I'm just saying, don't tell him he's working on his own branch, and he never touches the other branches. He never brings the other branches onto his. He never pushes to the other branch. It's annoying to take over, but it's going to be better than fixing everything he breaks.
Hey everybody, my name is Tony. I'm a student at Kennesaw State University, and I just wanted to know how much is enough for a new version, because usually if I worked with a project that I have, I save often, but say I added a new camera script or I did something particular, I would save that particular working version. What in your opinion is the point where you guys say, hey, we need to stop what we're doing right now and we need to lock this away so we don't touch it?
I'd say anything that, especially when you're working on somebody else's dollars, so if you're working somewhere, anything that's going to cost you a lot of time to redo. So, for instance, if you're spending an hour on something and you finish it and it's working, it's integrated into your project, push it. Because if you have to go back and spend an hour again, that people don't often like when you have to do that. When you have to tell your boss, oh, well, I messed something up, I had to go revert and do it again. They're like, well, okay, well, explain to me why you have to do this. And not only do you have to go back and redo the work, but then you have to explain why you messed up. So,
yeah, I think it's kind of a personal preference thing, but for me, anytime I'm switching tasks, like if I'm working on a bug or if I'm working on a new feature, anytime I get to a point where I feel like it's at a good stopping point, or I'm switching to something else, I'll commit. Anytime I've been like working on something for a few hours and I'm like, Yeah, I should probably commit this. It's in a good state. Anytime it's in a good state, you should probably commit. If it's in a bad state, you maybe should revert. I don't know.
So, certainly if you're doing bug fixes, it might just be like a line change, and that's fine if that's what it is. If you're like this weekend, I'm working on this large refactoring of our code base, and so it's until I'm done, it's completely broken. There's tons of stuff that's broken. So I've been doing like a lot of small commits and just putting like work in progress, that kind of thing. But before I push that up, so if you're using Git, they have something called rebasing, which is another scary thing, even scarier than merging, but basically it rewrites the history. And so I can take 10 commits that only I've been doing, nobody else is touching the stuff, I haven't pushed to the main server yet, and I can squash those into one commit. So once they're all, you ideally don't want to commit the repository in a broken state. So it happens sometimes, but I try to warn people when I put in work in progress. But if I'm just working in isolation, I can take all of those and kind of combine them into one, and everyone else should see this one massive.
Personally, like if I'm working with a large game, for example, and I'm making a new feature branch, I'll branch off into a feature, and I've even committed things as far as going through the code before I really get started coding, and I make little comments for myself, like, oh, this is where this might be hooked in, oh, this is where I think this is going to be hooked in, this is going to be hooked in, and I've even just committed like some comments that I've made in the code as like a first commit. That way I can go back and look at it later and say, oh yeah, that's exactly where I thought that this is where I need to go be hooked. But it's all about personal preference. I've done commits where it's just one line change. If it's working, I pretty much commit. I've even had times where I'm on my own branch and something is just not working right, and I know it's not working right. I can commit that, and I can have my coworker actually pull my branch and look at it on his machine, and see what I might have done that kind of put my code into a cattywampus or put my results not exactly to where I expected it to be. But always when I'm merging back into the main repo, like it has to be like feature complete. If I'm merging back into master, for example, I know that it's something that's release ready.
So I like it anytime I can justify a commit message, which sometimes means, after 4 hours I'm going to go commit, and I'm like, no, actually I did two things each worthy of a commit message, so I'm going to commit these as two different commits. If you have any kind of task management system, anytime I check a task off, that's a commit with that task number, so I can see what I thought I was doing at the very least when I checked it off. This is all for code. If you're committing art, there's probably a different set of rules, but there's no cost on to storing that extra one-line change.
Something I just want to add that's not really connected to that question, but always add comments to your commits. We've had issues in the past where people have just written stories in their commits. Like one day this guy went to the market and he did it. That's not what you committed. So when we had to go and revert back, you're like, I have no idea what you did, other than going through each file that you committed. It was a good story. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But try to make your commits very, or your comments on your commits very accurate as to what you did and what you're about to do as well. So it's just something that I felt we mentioned.
I worked with a coworker that I had seriously actually considered taking some of his commit messages and publishing a book of the things that people commit, and all of it was, a Twitter account. And all of it was relevant. Like he would say what he had committed, but he would always have like some offhand comment in like the extra section, or like some snarky remark. And oh man, those are the best. We should get together after this.
Hello, my name is Eduardo. I'm a game developer and host of Debug Log. My question is for Edie. You said that you use GitHub usually, but GitHub has a limit of 1 gig for the repo. What do you do, or what's your option if your project is bigger than that?
So usually my projects don't end up being much bigger than that. Especially if I have art on a different repo. I'm sorry, I can't.
So, if you are a studio, you're a company, you're a large team, most studios will set up their own server that they post on. They don't use an external hosting service, and it's not really that hard to do. It can be, can be a little bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, but it is a lot cheaper than paying for GitHub or whatever.
This is where not using Material and not Git breaks down just a little bit, but the Tortoise Material package actually comes with its own little web server. So you turn that on, and then suddenly that's it's a few clicks of a button, and suddenly you have your own private server.
Hi, my name is Zack, and I came in a little bit late, about 20 minutes. So I'm sorry if this question's already been asked. We've seen a lot of indie groups here. You see the indie collective in Expo Hall, and it's usually like two to five people working on a game together. My question is, at what point do you say we need to go all in on doing repositories, and even if we don't know who to run it because our group reached a certain size, or could they just stay with like Dropbox if they're a certain like size, like they're small?
You like living dangerously, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if I'm even working on a project by myself, I use Git or some kind of version control. I would not use Dropbox. I don't know. I would highly recommend learning it. It won't take you that long. Seems like it might, but it probably will only take you a few hours.
I wouldn't judge by the size of the team. I judge by the length of the project. If it's something that you're going to kill in a couple days, because let's test and see what if we like this art style, and we never ever want to look at these files again, you can use Dropbox. But if you're planning on using those for like a month, I would definitely have it in version control.
And even like when I'm like doing a prototype of something, I have my own repo. Like even if it's going to be thrown away, if I'm only going to work on it for 2 days, it also can be used as like a portfolio piece, or code samples. So I tend to keep a lot of that on a repo on GitHub, for even if it's just going to be a 2 or 3 day project.
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned about like having projects that you can show on GitHub is a big thing. Like that kind of helps you build your reputation as a developer. If people can look at your GitHub account and see that you've worked on small projects by yourself, just for fun or whatever, it looks good.
And also on GitHub, when they download their project, they can look at your code and see how well you organize it. So that's always a good thing to show to a prospective employee.
And at the end, if you do have a portfolio, you should bring it to the portfolio and code review.
Anybody got any other questions? No? We answered all your Git and... Oh, there you go. All right. So, we talk a lot about version control for things like managing who's to blame for entering code, or for having backups, or for just making sure everyone's on the same page with distribution. But can any of you guys talk to version control for the use of like security or preventing corruption from outside sources? Why do you even come here? So like if you get hacked, or someone intentionally tries to like put bad code into your system, or even it doesn't have to even be necessarily like an external hack, although that's a thing that's happening a lot more often. But like when you choose version control, when you use version control, how much do you either think about or appreciate what it can offer in terms of dealing with outside interference with your source?
We don't necessarily, we're not really concerned about hackers, but we have had issues with our server being corrupted. So not only do we use version control, but we also back up all of our servers. So if we do have an issue with, say, a hard drive messing up and the server goes down, we have a backup of that server, which we actually had to deal with. And so we didn't even do it the right way by backing up the actual whole server. The person just copied the repos folder, which is not how you do it. But yeah, that's about all I have right now.
So in part, you can create a malicious addition to the code base, like a bad program addition, right? You can just back it out. So there's most version control systems have some form of authentication. So if you see a commit from random YouTube handle looking thing, you know that's not a person working on your project. You can just be like, I don't know what's going on here. I'm gonna get rid of it. There's depending on where you're doing it, like a lot of our version control, we have a local server, so that means they're on a LAN, which is not something that we really have to worry about in our office because no one cares enough to break in and get into our LAN. So that's part of how we deal with it. And then on the server itself, if you're using a distributed version control system, then even if your main server goes down or someone corrupts the iconic server, everyone has a copy of the data up to that point, so you have a lot of redundancy built in. If you're using a centralized version like SDN, Perforce, CDS, then you have to make sure to lock down that server like you would anything else that has valuable data.
Also, Git has the ability to use your RSA keys to lock down the repo. So only people who are authorized through those RSA keys are allowed to commit and push. However, I've actually been able to go in and remote into the server and add my own RSA key without having the admin duplicate it. So it's not that secure if I can do it.
I was going to add on to earlier when Zack was talking about, a lot of indie people here. I've seen a lot of people, they form, they call it indie dev team, but it's, college students coming together trying to make something, and then they're going to get hired probably somewhere else later based on the work they've done with their indie group, right? So if you're not doing version control, be that guy that does it, that teaches everybody, sets up a server if you want, and then that's part of your resume for later when you go to a job and maybe they don't have, maybe you go to another indie place and they actually have funding to pay you. If they're not doing it, you're like, you want to hire me because I know ABC. And it's just really good practice, and it's standard in the industry to have version control. It really is. And Zack, when you started, I know you got thrown out in the fire, right?
Yeah, so I hadn't actually touched any version control when I got hired where I work currently. And they said, I walked in, they go, okay, we need a new Git server, set that up. What's Git? So I had to sit there and for 2 weeks, I had to watch Linda videos to figure out how to set up the server. It was really kind of just throwing me under the bus, but I managed to get it up and running. So it's not impossible. You got to watch a lot of YouTube videos, and you got to really just jump into learning it. So it's a really good skill to learn, especially coming right out of school. To be able to say, hey, I can set up a Git server, run it, and be an admin on that server. It's something that a lot of companies would like.
And talking about like portfolio stuff, I've even in the past worked in large companies where I don't have like the whole project to go and show future employer. But I tend to, if I work on like a huge feature and I know I have like one good file or two good files that I know are all me, I have like a repo in Git that is called code samples/Lua, where I had several files that I worked on that I was able to, I just put it into my repo, again, because a lot of times when you're applying for a job, they ask for your GitHub account. They ask for, to see if you have any code samples, so I just have one which says, code samples Lua. It doesn't compile, it doesn't anything, but they can at least look and see like what my style is and some of what I've done in that language. So might be a good idea.
That's a great point. I when I was looking for a job, and so many times said, "Oh, give me your Git name, your Git username," and I'm like, "Yeah," and it had like two things in it from when I was a sophomore in college that I was like ashamed to show anybody. and I was like ashamed that I hadn't been pushing more of my projects to my, my Git name, Git server, because I stopped using it, and so keeping up with it is very important, I think.
And having it linked to your LinkedIn. I have mine linked to my LinkedIn, so that, and I have my own portfolio website, and I also have a link to it on my portfolio website. So making sure that that's open and access to everyone. And a lot of stuff I do have private, but if I have an employer that wants to see it, then you can say, all right, well, give me your Git name, and I'll let you see some of my stuff. Right? So you can give them read access to the project.
It's also a lot nicer than carrying around a bunch of USB drives. So when you go to interview and you hand them a USB drive, it's all on there, and they go search through it, and they have to search through all your other files that are on there. It's a lot cleaner to say, okay, here's the URL. Just go there. Take a look at it.
On the other hand, it is nice to be able to choose, a few files that you feel like best represent you, as opposed to here's everything, and then they dig through and maybe they find the class that does nothing impressively, or the class that you wrote at 4 a.m. and it worked, and you never quite went back to fixing the style or variable.
So one thing I don't think we kind of hit on, but didn't. I was just curious, how many people here use Unity? Unreal? Any other engines? Okay, cool. So, like, I know with Unity, we're a Unity development house, and there can be plugins, or maybe there's not plugins. Do you guys want to touch on any of that? If you know, like with SPN, like one of the things you have to show hidden file, meta file. You have to show the meta file. So that's pretty important. That people that just getting in, they don't know that, And so anything like that, ease of use enough.
Yeah, in terms of setting up your project, you want to go into your project settings and have meta files, and you want your scene files and your prefab files to be forced text. How many of you have ever had to deal with a scene or a prefab merge issue? Do you guys know about the Unity Smart Merge tool? Because I don't think most people do. Unity has made a merge tool specifically for those files that they have not publicized well, and you should go look it up and get it set up for your project.
We run across that issue a lot, because a lot of times artists want to go light the scene while I'm placing like scripts on objects. I'm like, whoa, what are you guys doing? But a lot of what we've done to accommodate for that is make separate art scenes where they can adjust their prefabs and stuff, and then we instantiate their prefabs. Unfortunately, lighting doesn't really work like that. So lighting is the one thing that we have to allow that, but that sounds like that would be a really good thing for us to look into.
Beyond just the basics, with Unity in particular, we use a couple of repositories for a given project. We use a base project repository that we can always branch off of, and basically just kickstart the project, because we do a lot of smaller projects. And then we've got reusable code, so we'll have a library that we use as a Git submodule. That's not completely intuitive at first, but you can basically pull in all that code and have another project so that we can share code across different projects. There's a really good blog series that I found called Unity and Git Friends Forever. It's like a 5-part series that goes over that pretty good. I don't like their particular flow approach to handling branches, but
so with Perforce, Unity actually has Perforce has a Unity plugin that allows you to actually very easily check out things. So say if you just open up a script, it'll check it out for you. And it's really nice when it works. I haven't actually downloaded it recently, but the first time I tried it, because I'm still working on the project that I had an issue with.